let's talk about for a second, leapfrog off that question is, I know that was embedded in what Master Moody was talking about, but really, you have some stuff that for some reason seems to fall off people's plate, and especially in COVID, killed a whole bunch of schools, right? One is always be marketing, right? And a basic principle with advertising, and it seems like the bigger the company is, the more it's run by drones in the middle of the corporate structure who are on a salary, is, you know, what they'll do, what will they do in a downturn? They'll cut their marketing budget to cut expenses. Now, there's two things you're always having to be concerned about cutting. You're concerned about cutting staff compensation, and you're concerned about cutting staff if you're already running efficiently, right? Now, most of us, once we get flush, we also become bloated. So the thing you always have to worry about, and what you hear if you watch, you know, if you read Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, one thing or another over a long period of time, in flush times, big companies all talk about how great their bench strength is. And in hard times, they talk about how they're right-sizing and getting lean and mean. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, when they're lean and mean, usually it's cut to the bone, and they just decide that everybody does 3 times as much stuff as everybody else. And usually their level of prioritization isn't very good. I mean, there certainly are exceptions. You can't argue that Tim Cook doesn't have his priorities straight, for instance, and Elon Musk and so forth. But frankly, even in those companies, it's unusual if they have a managerial class CEO rather than founder, that they make good decisions on stuff like that. But what we see all the way down to the level of the individual small martial arts school is when money gets tight, what's the first thing they cut? Marketing. And so one is always be marketing. Doesn't matter what else is going on. And especially, by the way, you're drinking from a fire hose and you got more traffic than you can handle, and oh my God, how are we going to do this? We just made 380 appointments this weekend. We've got 100 appointments a night. Scales. Anybody been there? A bunch of you have been there, right? What do you have to do before you go to bed at night and when you wake up in the morning that day? What am I going to do tomorrow to make sure I'm marketing the school effectively? First thing in the morning, what am I going to do today to make sure I'm marketing the school effective? Now, I freely admit that part of the question has to be, how do I make sure I keep the ratios tight and convert these people to enrollments? But the biggest mistake on that, when you have volume that you make, is all of a sudden you're overwhelmed, and what do? You stop marketing. Because you're just trying to deal with what you got. And then the next month you have a crappy month. Why do you have a crappy month? Well, there's a lag time, so if you're not doing the marketing in April, May, and June, or if you have a big bubble in April and take your eye off the ball, all of a sudden you have a crappy June, right? So one must do is always be marketing, never take your eye off that ball, no matter how overwhelmed you are or no matter how stressed out you are about the budget. So you're stressed out about the budget, you don't cut the Facebook ads. You're stressed out about the budget, you don't cut the direct mail list following up with prospects. You're stressed about the budget, you don't cut the pay-per-click ads. In fact, if you're stressed about the budget, double down on all that stuff, assuming it's working, right? So you've always got to focus on the marketing every day. And that's in lean times, and that's when you're so busy you can't figure out what to do, right? And probably every one of you have made that mistake a few times. God knows I've made the mistake. We've got so much traffic coming in, I can't figure out how to handle it all. Oh my God, I don't need more traffic. And then stopped doing the other stuff that I knew how to do, and then guess what? You're sitting there twiddling your thumbs because all of a sudden it all runs out and you don't have the next bucket anymore, right? So that's one must do. Write that down. Keep it in front of you. You know, you don't go to bed at night without, telling yourself and planning for tomorrow what I'm going to do to keep my new student flow going. And you start the day at Starbucks or wherever with a blank legal pad with the phone turned off, and you do your planning for the day on what we're going to do to plan and organize to get things going. And that's forever. And in fact, let's say you're at multiple schools or you're absentee owner, you got all the staff lined up, you got all that stuff going. What responsibility do you never abdicate? The marketing. The two responsibilities you never abdicate are the staff training and development and the marketing. And you can certainly have, I used to have, Kari Sullivan did staff training, recruiting, interviewing, ran all the accelerated training programs, did all that stuff, but I was intimately involved with it because the most important thing I had was the staff coming up. And the thing that I handled myself was all the media advertising, but I also handled myself looking for opportunities and coordinating to make sure the staff are going to handle it. So you never, ever really delegate those two things. And again, if you look at Apple as the most valuable company in the world right now, but certainly Elon Musk in Tesla, certainly Tim Cook now, previously Steve Jobs, they're intimately involved in messaging and intimately involved in marketing. Wouldn't you agree? See, so you've got to be even more so because you don't have the resources they have, right? So that's one thing. Always be marketing. Focus on it before you go to bed at night. Focus on it first thing in the morning, and especially when you're overwhelmed with volume. If you're overwhelmed with volume, you got to double down and keep the momentum going. And if the budget is tight, the thing you don't cut is marketing, right? And then on staffing, number two is you're constantly focused on having a flow of new staff coming in and developing and nurturing the people you have, right? And again, the rule is you're constantly developing bench strength, and you're constantly nurturing and developing the people who want to be and are capable of being nurtured and developed. Because see, here's what happens. There's no such thing as the perfect staff, the perfect situation, because as soon as you have everything running like a top, well, got the new fiance, just got married, and the wife is whispering in my ear, or the husband's whispering in my ear, why are you making him or her rich? Why don't you do it yourself? Right? And I don't pull that randomly. Would you both agree that probably the number one reason you have a staff member leave is one of two scenarios. Parents and everybody around them are saying, when are you going to get a real career? And now they go to work for the bank or something real boring ass that they don't have as much income potential either. But everybody around them, which is parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, for the younger staff, are saying, when are you going to get a real career? Yeah, I know you're playing down at the karate school. That's fine. I bet you're having a good time. When are you going to get a real career? Now, you know how you solve that is you make sure they're making 20% more than they can make anywhere else. Because at least if they can come home and say, well, I looked at the bank and they were going to pay me $42,000 a year, and I'm making $75,000 a year, and do I really want to take a 30% pay cut? Right? At least if they could have that conversation. Now, by the way, they don't know to have that conversation unless you coach them on having that conversation. Does that make sense? So you've got to be constantly focusing on, that's the good ones. I'm not talking about 15-year-old that you're, that's a volunteer, assistant instructor that, you developed into minimum wage. But what I'm talking about is the good ones. You want it to be where you're constantly nurturing the good ones. And part of nurturing the good ones is coaching them about how, when people are telling them to get a real career, when you're going to get a real job, this is a real job, this is a real career, and how to handle that. If you didn't pay attention before Rush Limbaugh died, one of the things he had was he had a primer on how to talk to liberals. Did you ever see that? No, seriously, right? Because And if you've ever dealt with an MLM company, they have primers on how to talk to your friends about what you're doing. And in both cases, why? Well, in Rush's case, you know, he didn't want somebody who's all hot and bothered, oh, thank you, all hot and bothered and listening to him, you know, to go to Thanksgiving dinner and have people with a better argument than him and have them get discouraged in one thing or another, right? It wasn't really about convincing anybody, it was about so his listeners would like not get discouraged in one thing or another. But the MLMs had really bad reputation in a lot of ways, right? So what happens is, as soon as a new person jumps in, really enthusiastic, as soon as they tell 5 friends that they pitch, is 4 of the 5 are like, oh my God, I can't believe you're involved with that, right? So they give them the primer on how to talk to those people, on how to explain in the steps. There you go. So you've got to teach your staff how to deal with, you know, the parents and the relatives who are telling them to get a real job. And you've also got to teach your staff, the full-timers, the reality of what the business looks like. How many have ever heard somebody say, well, I don't want, you know, I'm making them rich? Anybody ever heard that? To your face, I guess I should say. I got to tell you, it's happened behind your back if you haven't heard it to your face, okay? I had a guy years and years ago, it was the funniest thing, you know, before I really recognized the phenomenon. And he was pissed off about something, I don't even know what it was. And I was paying him 20% more than he ever made in his life. And he ends up quitting in a huff one day, and I found out later he's working in a liquor store for minimum wage. And he was making for me, I mean, this is 20, 30 years ago, probably 30 years ago, he was making $60,000 a year, and he took a job, you know, that was paying him $18,000 a year. But it was because he was pissed off that he was making me rich. Well, human nature is like that. So you've got to educate them, right?
And they think that you're pocketing 100% of your gross.
That's exactly.
No, if you make $20,000 in your school, they think $20,000 is going in your pocket.
Yeah.
Because they know they're getting paid, and they know you have rent, and they know that, but they still think that when you say you have 20,000 gross, that 20,000 is going in your pocket.
Yeah.
100%. They don't think you pay taxes. They don't think you have expenses. They think 100% is going in your pocket.
Well, but even if they think about it logically, even if they're smart and they think about it logically, it's not like they've researched what commercial rents cost. It's not like they've researched what advertising costs. It's, they say, well, I'm paying $1,200 a month for my efficiency apartment. Or worst case, they're living at home, right? But I'm paying $1,200 a month for my efficiency apartment. They're probably paying about the same. Somehow they just make that relationship. And so one of the things you do, and you know, you can share the P&L, or you can just, I would always have the guys, you know, I show up and the space next door is available, and they'd want to take the space next door. I'd say, well, it really doesn't make any sense. I mean, you know, we know about 7 square foot per active student. You're at 280 students. You've got plenty of room. You know, plus that would be another $4 grand. Well, what do you mean? Well, we're paying $5,200 here. That'd be another $4,000. What possible use would we make of the other $4,000 other than you think it'd be really cool, you know, for people to be able to spend their, you know, their bow staffs over there while the little ninjas were going over here. What possible use do we really have for that? But see, conversations like that, they start to think, right? All the advertising, when we're doing big budget stuff especially, you know, I'd bring in the newspaper ads and all the TV and stuff, and Junior, to his credit, was very good about this. But I'd make sure they knew everything that was going on, right? Because sometimes you make the ultimate mistake of you're doing 22 things, they don't even know that you're doing it, right? They're just kind of sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. I'd make sure they knew everything that was going on, but we'd also have meetings about, okay, so this ad got 15 info calls last month. That ad cost $2,500. So therefore, every info call cost us $150. So when the phone rang, that was $150. You know, you got 50% conversion, so it cost you $300 for an appointment. You got 80% appointment, so it cost, you know, whatever that is in my head. And I'd have those kind of conversations. And then it'd be, we did this, 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 right? Because what do they start to think? They start to think, well, you're not doing anything to help us. All you're doing is bitching at us about marketing. Every freaking time we see you, you're bitching at us about marketing. God damn, I can't believe every time you're talking to me, you're talking about why don't I have birthday parties and why don't it's all on our backs to get all that stuff. And then you want me to go to the fair and do this stuff, right? That's what starts to happen, right? Is they start to think about that. So, you know, number one, you've always got to be thinking about and implementing marketing all the time. When things are really good, they'll get really bad if you take your eye off the ball. And when things are tight, the last thing you do is cut the marketing budget. Two is you want to balance being lean and mean with having bench strength. But and those are two contradictory things, right? Is having a bunch of people running around versus having the right payroll size. But the most important piece of that is, and by the way, if, you know, as minimum wage goes up, I already don't like part-timers, but it gets me further and further away from caring about part-timers, right? I mean, I've never paid a full-timer anywhere near minimum wage in my life. You know, we were starting them at $30,000 a year in 1983 for full-timers. But, you know, part-timers, given their depth of ability to contribute, based upon if they're not coming to your staff meetings, and, you know, if somebody's working 20 hours a week, that's one thing. Somebody's working 5 hours a week, you know, it is something else. But, you know, if these things, if part-time wages keep going up, my perspective is I just won't have any part-timers, because full-timers are much more valuable. Now, you know, that's an oversimplification. I probably still have to have, in most cases, the 4 hour a day receptionist or something like that. But it's, and by the way, that's the dynamic that happens in that environment anyway. But when you're looking at staff, people make the mistake of undercompensating really good people, overcompensating really weak people, and they make the mistake of having too much head count. And so you've got to focus on the ones who are really engaged and really competent and really excited and hopefully career oriented, and make sure they're making more than they can make anywhere else. That's, you know, supply and demand. Otherwise, you know, if they're taking a 20% pay cut because they really love martial arts, then what happens is they're constantly being enticed by other stuff. Well, I really love it here, but I'd like to buy a house. I really love it here, but, you know, it'd be cool to have that new Mustang, right? You don't want them to be enticed. And there's enough pressure. There's the new fiance or wife or husband whispering in their ear about they're making you rich on one side, and there's the family going, why don't you get a real job on the other side? You don't want them to be enticed. You want to be constantly, you know, one, being clear on expenses and so forth, but two, the ones that are really good, you're constantly mentoring, nurturing, showing them a career ladder, showing them the future, and hopefully they're making more than they can make anywhere else. Does that make sense? So that's number two. Number two is you're constantly nurturing staff and you're constantly looking for their replacement. And I don't mean that to be harsh, right? But it's always a mistake for me to use sports analogies. But if you take the New York Yankees or whoever as a baseball team, do they have the one best pitcher in the world? How many pitchers do they have? 12? Seriously?
Yeah, well, you got bullpen.
What?
Yeah, your starters and your closers.
They have a bunch of them. Okay. I was going to go for 3 or 4, but 12? I don't know sports. I can use boxing, kickboxing. You know. Okay. There you go. Okay. Okay. No. But you already get the point, right? Is if you're trying to develop the best baseball team or the best football team, and you have one perfect pitcher, and you always win the game when that person pitches for the entire game, what happens with their arm is sore? What happens if they are sick that day, what happens if they're not there, right? And so what you've always want to do is you want to make sure you have bench strength, and you're really nurturing the good ones and getting rid of the bad ones as quickly as possible, right? And you really want to discriminate among your staff. You really want to differentiate between attitude. People with good attitude, you nurture. People with bad attitude have to go away as quickly as possible. People with intelligence, you really want to nurture the ones that have the capability to do what you're doing. You really want to help the ones that don't have the capability onto a more profitable and productive career for them, right? And what most of us do, by the way, is we hire fast and fire slow. And really what you want to do is the opposite. Because your natural instinct is going to be, what was Nick's saying? Hope springs eternal. Your natural instinct is hope springs eternal, so you think, there's hope at the end of the rainbow here. But once you've figured out that this person isn't going to work, it's better for them if you let them know. Because what happens is you can help them go to a career where they can thrive. Because just because they can't thrive with you doesn't mean they can't thrive with anybody else. I remember I had a receptionist slash secretary for quite a while. And she just couldn't possibly ever be successful with what we were doing. But it always reminds me of the stories I hear of the Beatles, of them talking about Ringo. Is, John and Paul would go, but what about Ringo? What's Ringo going to do, right? Which, by the way, Ringo then had an album that outsold Paul or John almost immediately after they broke up. But what happens is in this case, it was like we just couldn't bring ourselves to fire her, right? It's like we can't possibly imagine that she has any place else that she can, that she can get paid as well. And oh my God, we all loved her, but it was just impossible. There was never going to be any positive outcomes. And finally, we get around to it, and she goes to work. Immediately goes to work for the big King Soopers, which is Kroger, and immediately got a bump in pay, and loved it, and even liked karate better because she was coming in and training rather than having to be an employee and struggling. Loved the environment there, loved the people there, didn't lose any of the people here, and it went on. But we had her on payroll for like a year and a half past the time all of us had decided that there's no possible way she can thrive anywhere else. But I mean, if somebody's not going to make it, I mean, it's not their fault necessarily if they just don't have the aptitude or the intelligence or the capability. But it's not your job to stifle their career. It's your job to help them find a place where they'll be able to thrive, right? And so it's a really much better way to think about it. Now kicking somebody to the curb 2 weeks before Christmas, and not giving them their last check because you're pissed off because they were incompetent. Well, that's on you. Then you're being an asshole. But what you want to do is you want to look at all of your staff and you want to nurture and develop them. But the ones that aren't going to be able to develop with you, help them find some place where they can develop and thrive and succeed, right? But don't let it linger. Because what almost always happens is you fire them 6 months too late, right? And the other thing that almost always happens is somebody walks through the door and you have a desperate need, and it's like he or she is perfect for this job. Well, I mean, everybody can be perfect for 30 minutes, right? I would much rather stretch out the interview process over a couple of weeks. I would much rather have them in the environment, have them interact with the people they're going to have to interact with. Make sure I've done the background checks. Make sure that I've put them in some stressful situations and see what happens. I stole it from the way that Master Smith did at Junior Institute, but I always have all of our staff interview them, because if somebody just doesn't click with them, then why am I going to throw them into the mix? It would always be they'd come in and meet at a meeting and talk to everybody. Then I'd send them out to each of the schools, and each of the branch managers would interview them, and then we get back together and have a consensus of what do you think of so and so, what do you think of so and so, and if they had, if they all loved them and adopted them basically, then it was going to work, right? And if they all hated them and I loved them, oh my God, that's a disaster, right? And if there were mixed reviews, you should listen to that. So you've got to really hire slow, find the right person, and at the same time, when you figure out they're not gonna work, help them find a career where they can thrive as quickly as possible, right? But you gotta fire quickly, hire slowly. Most of us do the opposite. That makes sense? So there's two must-dos. You must market every day. You must spend and never abdicate recruiting, building bench strength, and nurturing people. And the subset of that is overcompensate people who are really good and undercompensate or get rid of people who really aren't very valuable, right? And again, we'll talk to people and say, oh, I have this person coming in and they teach on a class on Monday for an hour and on Wednesday for an hour, and I pay them $50 a class, and they do this. It's like, well, why are you doing that? Well, what do you mean? Just have a full-timer, and they do all that stuff. And then you have your leadership team people coming up underneath you, and frankly, you have, I've always had a bunch of 45, 50, 55-year-olds who, they're never gonna kick vertically, and they're not gonna be a competitor, but they're a great asset, right? And most of the adults, they don't wanna be compensated. In fact, if I start paying them hourly, I actually ruin their attitude about it rather than help their attitude about it, right? Because if I have an engineer making $120,000 a year, and I start paying them $10 an hour or $15 an hour, then, it turns into a job, and it turns into a job that doesn't pay well relative to what they're used to, right? So I've got to be careful not to destroy that. So that's two things. Always be developing and nurturing staff, and always be marketing, and always go to bed at night focusing on marketing, always get up in the morning focusing on what you're going to do that day. Does that make sense? Sure. The third must do is what Master Moody was saying a minute ago here, which is make sure that your mission is getting people started really smoothly that first 2 months. Everything from the folder conferences to over-explaining to confirming each of their first, say it again?
Students?
Yes, new students, yeah. To over-explaining each of the processes to avoid being confused. In other words, explain it the first time they come in, explain it the second time, explain it the third time, the fourth time, as I explained last time. What you want to make sure you do is this, 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 and this. Because frankly, most of the time, first or second time, they haven't got it yet.
And by multimedia.
Yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
don't do it on the enrollment conference. This is after they sign their paperwork. That's why you have that enrollment folder conference, that next class or two after they sign the paperwork. Now they're part of the group, they're a member, now we can start giving them all the information, how our programs work, what's expected of them. And now they're a lot more on board, and that's part of the pre-framing that we constantly talk about.
Yeah, yeah. So, is this making sense so far? So, the third thing you must always do is you never take your eye off the ball of nurturing the new students, getting them started well, and setting their goal to be a black belt and beyond in that first 2 months. And again, if you go, Commander Cal was using Covey's language of urgent, important, urgent, not important, not urgent, not important, right? The nurturing the white belts and walking them through the goal setting process tends to be the thing that people get really busy and they take their eye off the ball. Because they rationalize and they say, well, I'll do that when they get their gold belt. And then when they get their gold belt, you go, well, but they've got another year, almost a year. We'll get to it. And to use Master Smith's language, they're dying on the vine, right? You want to get to the point where when they're ripe is when you're setting the goal, you're getting them to black belt. But if you don't do it early, oftentimes you don't do it at all, right? Certainly we all know in here you don't wait till the end of 12 months. The old EFC thing used to be the half moon and you did it at the halfway point. That was a big improvement over waiting for a year, but it was wrong, it was too late. It needs to be early, right? It really needs to be you're focused on formal class number 1 of really making sure that they understand what the process is, and while they're at white belt. They really set their goal and most of the time commit to train to black belt while they're a white belt. It really has to be early on. Because if you don't do that, what happens is they get further and further along, and this is an activity they're going to do for a season in their mind or for a year in their mind, and they're already thinking about what they're going to do after karate. And we allow that to develop without really nurturing them and getting them excited, right? So the always must do, always be marketing. When money's tight, never reduce the advertising budget. And when things are busy, never take your eye off what's going to fill the next bus. And again, I mean, the perfect example is the COVID crap that happened even in the mile high schools. Is one of them had they had 380 leads, 320 appointments, and then the whole staff got COVID. Another one had 70 appointments, the whole staff got COVID. And then they were shut down for 14 days. And then the second thing that happened in the same instance, a couple of them had gotten off of doing intros, enrollments, and classes on Zoom, and they had to go through that same like 2-week learning curve all over again, rather than just having kept that going. Does that make sense? I mean, Amanda, it felt like back in March, where you were having to go through the learning curve, and everybody was following that learning curve. Well, if you don't want to go through it twice, right? Once you figured it out, you just want to keep that in place. So, see, that's one example, but there's all kinds of different reasons why you got the bus load of people coming in, and it feels like you have enough enrollments to last you a year. So why should I be focusing on marketing? And in reality, either they get hosed or it does really well, but then you get a month or two later and you got nothing come in. Does that make sense? So must do, always be marketing. Focus on it every day. When things are good, throw gas on the fire. When things are bad, don't cut it. In fact, throw gas on the fire. Number 2, nurture staff. Be really nurturing the good ones and always looking for their replacement, right? And by the way, if you're always looking for your replacement, Dennis Way used to talk about reticular activating system, and you're looking at you're driving around and all of a sudden you're looking for a car, and you're looking for a Corvette, or you're looking for a Ford Mustang, or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere, right? Everybody knows the phenomenon. But guess what? If you're always looking for staff, you start seeing them everywhere. Because see, that's just the way your brain works, right? If you're thinking, God, I really want to make sure I have a backup for him and I have a backup for her, and then you're thinking about it and looking, all of a sudden you have the waiter that's so delightful that you're trying to talk them into working for you even though you don't have a slot available, right? All of a sudden you notice that the big brother of the 7-year-old just came back for college, is a black belt, and is has a great attitude and so forth, and they might want a job. I mean, you just start noticing things you wouldn't notice otherwise, right? And then the third thing was you can never back off of white belts. You've always got to make sure that those steps, from the enrollment folder, obviously the stripes, the prep for the test, all of the pieces of spotlighting, all the pieces of prepping them for the renewal, never slips. And by the way, very successful schools I've seen, most common is they start to let the renewals slip. I mean, this is when they plateau or hit a decline. They start to let the renewals slip, and they start going from most of the renewals are white belts to most of the renewals are gold belts to most of the renewals are orange, green, whatever you have next. They start moving up in ladder, which means all of a sudden they have fewer of them. Subtly, to the point that they don't really notice, the dropout rate starts going up. The renewal rate starts going down, right? The other thing that happens is they get so busy on intro traffic that they get complacent. And then all of a sudden there's a bus a quarter, there's not a bus a week of new people coming in, right? And it just starts to slip, right? I mean, that clearly just, Matt Smith, that clearly defines Amanda Christensen and Stephen, right? You know, very successful school, but oh my God, we got a bunch of intro traffic, but you know, this Facebook thing's working really well. I'm so glad you talked us into that. Fantastic, we're getting all of our traffic from that. Well, what about all this other stuff you were doing? Well, but this is working really well. Oh, okay, you just don't like working that hard. I got it. Wait a minute, how many wipeouts are there that are renewed? Oh, there aren't any. Oh, that's a problem. There's orange belts out there that aren't renewed. Yeah, we got to get around to that. Oh, okay. You don't enjoy making $500,000 a year anymore. Is that what I'm hearing?
Plus, it's so much more work.
Yeah.
It's so much more work not to have to be lots of intros. Oh crap, I gotta do renewals. Oh crap, I gotta market. Oh crap, I gotta do this. It's so much more work to do that than to try to build the discipline. And it really is a discipline question to me. To like the stuff we all talked about yesterday, where I was trying to say the musts. To every month I gotta market. Every month I gotta do the renewals. Every month I gotta do a few paid in fulls. Every month I gotta, because you know we end up like on the paid in full question. Not to get on a tangent, but it's the same thing. It's like, hey guys, Master Smith has a contest. Do some paid in fulls, and then a couple times a year, you know, Delfino does like a really good month because you do some paid in fulls. And then we go back, did you do one the next month? And I'm not trying to pick on you because maybe you're doing it consistently. But you know, it doesn't happen consistently every month. When you do it consistently every month, it becomes a rhythm and you do it normally. It becomes a normal process, so it becomes easy. You know, it's not hard for you to teach your classes all the time, right? I mean, you get used to it. You get used to teaching classes. You get used to doing this. You get used to doing stuff. You get used to opening your school. You get used to cleaning your school. You get used to doing things. So when you get used to doing these things on a regular basis, you build a rhythm for it. It doesn't become such work. But when it's, do it, oh my God, I gotta do it. And then you let off. And then, oh my God, I gotta do it. Then you let off. It becomes so much more work. So I would encourage you that it would be a lot easier if you did it on a regular basis.
The best, I always confuse metaphor and analogy.
Example.
The fallacy of a classical education, I guess. But it's the Zig Ziglar pump handle story, right? That's the perfect one. Everybody seen that? The Zig Ziglar with the pump? I mean, it's a classic if you haven't, it should be something you make your staff watch, once a month. But he has he's trying to pump water, and he had this big, I guess it was steel, I don't know how much the damn thing weighed, but this big pump handle that he would slip around to his seminars. And, he says, well, so it's like when you're pumping water, you have to pump and pump and pump and pump and pump and pump and pump. And then once you get it going, you just have to keep a nice steady stream on it. But guess what? If you stop, you have to go through that whole cycle over again. And marketing is certainly like that. And frankly, an awful lot of very successful people in the industry are finding out that if you let your student body go from 300 to 80, it's just as hard as a startup to get from 80 to 300, right? If you let it collapse, it's really damn hard to get it going. And it's it's one of those things that if I'm doing a startup and I'm throwing a lot of cash at it and a lot of labor at it, I can absolutely get 100 enrollments in the first month. But if all of a sudden I let things slip and I'm out of cash, and it has to be labor, I think Tim Kovar and I had this conversation one time. It's a heck of a lot easier to kill a school than it is to rebuild it, right? You've really, really, really got to keep your focus on, a plateau is just the first indication of decline, right? You really got to pay attention. If you're on a plateau, that's first indication of decline. You've got to keep things growing constantly.
When we had that contest, and the reason I did that contest is because a lot of people hadn't been doing paid in fulls. But when we did that contest, the schools raised over $250,000, and there was over 20 schools that did over 10,000 paid in fulls that month. And the question is, of those that were in there that finished in that top 20, how many of those had paid in fulls every month since that? Because it should be every month you have paid in fulls. Now, you're not always going to have that $30,000 or $40,000 paid in full, but you might have that 10 or 15 And that extra bump of 10 to 20,000 every month can take you from that $60,000 school to the $1 million school.
And the last one, and of course, I mean, we could break up running a school down into 200 details. But I'll say the last one is you can never lose sight of the culture of the school. And it requires constant vigilance. And it's, to me, one of the best lessons of Annapolis, West Point, one thing or another, is at their best is, you know, a midshipman doesn't go a week and a half wearing the wrong shoes. They don't go a week and a half, you know, wearing jeans and sweats when they're supposed to be in uniform. They probably go, I don't know, what would you say, Sal? If they show, yeah, probably about 5 seconds once somebody's around to pay attention. And that's the way you've got to be, is it's 5 seconds, it's not, you know, oh, by the way, let's tamp down on this stuff, right? It's one of the things, you know, the staff always hate about me is, you know, I know they talked about what an asshole I was behind my back constantly, but, you know, I would just kind of show up at the schools randomly, and there were all kinds of jokes and stories about, you know, like way back when I had a Dodge Stealth, you know, so it was the stealth bomber is here, but I'd walk in and look at the class, and it's always like, why does she have hoop earrings in class? Why is his belt tied wrong? You know, why is that kid wearing sweatpants? And half the time, almost everything I pointed out, they hadn't even noticed, right? But it would be, you know, let's have a little huddle, guys. Here's what the uniform is like, and here's what the pants are, here's what the top is. Well, what do you want me to do? They showed up, give them a pair of pants. I'd much rather, you know, have the $5 go out the door than have a lack of uniformity that we start tolerating. And, you know, and by the way, you got her sparring with earrings on. Do you think that's safe? You know, this one has, you know, all this jewelry on in class. Do you think that's a good idea? But it would be constant. I mean, you've got to know exactly what it's supposed to look like. And then you've got to be clear in the expectations of what it's got to look like. But it's just one little element of the culture, right? And again, you know, I mean, our dinner conversation was about how the culture in the military academies is slipping and how they're lowering their standards, right, Sal? And it's really depressing to hear because, you know, my mission with our black belt tests has been that every year we push the standards up. And my rule was all the way back to the 80s, I never want a black belt 10 years from now to be able, you know, I don't want a black belt now to 10 years from now say, well, son, you don't know how hard it was when we did it. There was a, no. We want it to be constantly, you know, I want it to be, wow, I'm glad I got my black belt when I did. I mean, you guys keep raising, they keep raising the standards. And by the way, I was very disappointed in our black belt test. I had a very depressed weekend last week.
I wasn't there, yeah, that's right.
That was not what I was depressed about. That was actually a joy to the spirit.
What happened?
Their basics suck.
Oh.
I almost did a June re on them. I actually had one 8-year-old crying.
Oh, that's not good.
She was halfway to her second-degree black. No, she was a second-degree black belt. We shouldn't have secondary black belts crying over a critique of their
Well,
basics.
It's a reminder for everybody
That we need to get the fucking mental toughness back, number one. And number two, we need to. And number two, we got to fix their basics. So.
well, all those black belts needed to hear John Critzo's talk.
Well, yes. So, no, but I was serious about that. Is, you know.
And that was what Grandmaster Reed was always pushing with basics. You know, not all the flashy, do all these things, the 360s that most of the students can't do, but have solid basics, have that foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we try to teach you guys even in here, the basic foundation of running your school.
Yeah, but number one is always be marketing. When you're drinking from a fire hose, keep opening the fire hose. Number two is when the budget's tight, throw money at marketing. You know, I've pulled the trigger on $35,000 TV campaigns when I could barely make the rent and I was having to negotiate with the landlords about skipping a couple months and let's divide out by 24 months. Most people do the opposite. They pay the utility bill, they pay the electric bill, they pay the rent, and they pay, whatever else, and then there's money left over, they put it into advertising. Totally wrong. Number two, be nurturing your quality staff. Be nurturing your low quality staff into careers where they can thrive. Not with you. And always make sure that you're overdeveloping, overtraining, and overpaying the good ones, right? And give them the skill set for handling the fiance and the wife nagging in their ear, and give them the skill set for handling the family nagging in their ear. And, on the one hand, is you're making him rich, why don't you just do it yourself, right? That's the wife, fiance, girlfriend, husband, whatever conversation. Almost
Boyfriend,
always.
Boyfriend.
Yeah, whatever.
Sometimes it's boyfriend.
Yeah. Boyfriend, fiance, husband, girlfriend, fiance. It's a significant, whoever they're sleeping with. Okay. Whatever. Let's just narrow it down to that. It's whispering in their ear, why are you making him rich? Why don't you do it yourself? And the parents and the grandparents and the aunt and uncle are saying, when are you going to get a real career? It's fun to play karate, right? I'm not overgeneralizing, but that's the two conversations. What percentage of your staff over the years was it one of two of those?
Mine?
Yeah.
That happens a lot,
Yeah.
And they don't come to you saying, hey, my spouse is yelling at me because they think you're getting me rich, or my spouse is telling me that you're being unfair to me. They come to you, but it sounds weird. It starts sounding weird, like, this doesn't seem like a logical conversation. Then you start figuring out that this is the case.
Most of them never came to me, they just disappeared.
Well, that happens too.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you have to start preempting the situation. I always was good at developing a good relationship with the spouse and making sure that I knew, hey, what's going on with you guys, and that's why.
But you got to give them the tools. You got to give them the tools to understand, right? And by the way, I think I only had one incident ever of the guy going down the street and trying to compete with me, right? Making an effort to take students. And that's pretty good after.
And I've never had that problem because I was established early on that a relationship with them martial arts wise, and that we, I don't think my guys ever thought they could do it without me.
Yeah.
Because they were supported, like what Master Oliver said about making sure they knew what kind of marketing I was doing, that all this support structure was around them.
Yeah.
That if they thought, I think it was really hard for them to think they could do it on their own. So what you're doing for them, even if you own multiple schools like Gustavo and some guys that own multiple schools, you're doing a lot for them. Even if like I was never in the school after a certain point, I was never physically there, but they knew that there was so much happening. Whether they were appreciative of it or not, it didn't really matter. If they thought they were going to go do it on their own, they were going a long way away for one thing because they wouldn't want to compete with me. And number two, they just generally wouldn't think they would want to do it because they wouldn't want to they wouldn't be able to do the things that I did.
Yeah. And by the way, the strange phenomena is that owners think the less I train them on, the less information I give, the less likely they are to go in competition with me. It works exactly the opposite. The more I train them on all aspects of the business, and the more insight or detail they have, the more likely they are, one, to be effective for me, and two, the less likely they are to think that the grass is greener, right? And see, but what happens with the grass is greener phenomenon is, you know, I mean, the metaphor is reality hits them in the face pretty quick, right? They just don't understand everything involved with it. And I always had the conversation with them very early on. I mean, you know, there's certainly several options here. One is you're with me forever, and we create a career path in one thing or another. And by the way, I don't have anybody who was with me in 1983. I don't have anybody with me who was with me in the 80s. I don't have anybody with me who was with me in the 90s. They all go away sooner or later, right? But it's, you know, at some point, you can be here forever. We can create a career path. We can create a great income stream. If you want to do this as a career and own one of your own, great. We can do it together. You can go out on your own. I don't care. I'd love to do something together, and if not, you can go out on your own. If you want, at any time you think you want to do that, either way, let me know, because there's an awful lot of things you need to be trained on before you go to do that. And by the way, an awful lot of things that Junior was nice enough to train me on, and Jeff Smith was nice enough to train me on, and I'd be happy to train you on before you did that. It's a lot better than learning while you're spending your own money and trying to sink or swim. And then, if they ever say they do, guess what? Fulfill your promise. And but the rest of the conversation is, you know, the only stipulation is, you don't stick a knife in my back, right? What do I mean by that? Well, I mean you go across the street and try to, you know, take my students with you, thinking they're your students, right? The students here at the school are my students.
They're the school students.
What's that?
They're the school students, you know? You
Yeah.
love them and nurture them or whatever, but they're the schools, just like the
Yeah.
Naval Academy.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the institution, you wanna stay on an institution.
Exactly.
Cause the minute they start saying, they're my students.
Yeah.
No, they're the school students.
Yeah.
That is the biggest thing. My mom lost 2 teachers and they went, 50% of it survived. But, like, they went down the street and did the thing, and it's because they stopped remembering that it was an institution, it wasn't just the teacher.
Right.
Yeah, you have to make it
Yeah.
the institution.
Yeah.
Sir, do you have them sign those cookies?
Absolutely, every time. And just as importantly, I have them sign a non-solicitation agreement. That includes probably a page and a half on sexual harassment and that you can't date students. I mean, this is going all the way back to 1983. Legally, oftentimes the non-solicitation is actually more enforceable than the non-compete. And frankly, really the only thing I care about is the solicitation. I could care less if they, you know, rented a space on top of me and run a school. I just don't want them trying to spend 6 months getting everybody to go with them. And by the way, frankly, that other example, what happened in reality is they took a whole bunch of, not a whole bunch, but they took a handful of people who were on paid in full second-degree black belt leadership programs. You know, I mean, it's a little disruptive, but it's not like guy lost their payment or anything. And, you know, anyone who was paying, we kept billing them and kept collecting. So, yeah, I mean, one mistake is, of course, the old, everybody's on a month-to-month. And the second mistake is not renewing them in the first 3 months. And the third mistake is not having clarity of relationship with new people on the way in the door. And the clarity of relationship is, if at any point you want to leave, or at any point we feel like this is not working out, is, you know, assuming it's not, you stole from us or something, but, you know, if at any point this isn't working out, from our end, I'll help you find a new career where you'll, you know, be able to thrive. And if at any point it's not working out on your end, I certainly appreciate that, you know, we work together, make it a smooth transition. I'll never just cut you off at the knees. But number 3 is, if you decide that your next step is to own your own school, you know, there's a lot of stuff you need to know, and I'll teach it to you. I'd be happy to nurture you with that, and you can go do it with me. You can do it on your own. Either way's fine with me. But the reality is I'll help you and train you, get you prepped, and do everything you need, as long as you promise, you know, never stab me in the back. And, you know, the way you would stab me in the back is, you know, open over there, or you know, try to convince the students that they're your students and take them with you, rather than that there's the school students, because they're not your students, you know. I spent the 32 years building this place, and I spent the money to get them in the door, and I trained you on what to do. And they're not here because you're a bubbly personality. They're here because of an awful lot of systems. And no matter how much they tell you, you know, they love you, is there were 12 instructors before you, and there will be more after you if you don't want to be here. And by the way, I'm not trying to be rude, but black belts tend to be egotistical, and they think their magnetic personality is what's going on. And by the way, the biggest assholes think it's their magnetic personality. That's why people are there, right? Okay, so again, number 3 is you focus on the white belts always. Never take an eye off the ball. Never take the eye off the ball of them committing to black belt. Never take the eye off the ball of them getting started smoothly. And number 4 is you keep a constant focus on the culture. And you never let the culture slip. Does that make sense?
Sir.
Questions on those 4? Does that all make sense?
Sir.
But if it were me, I would have that like tattooed somewhere, or I would have that on the wall. And you made the comment about the ABM thing. We were talking one time about, you know, what all I was doing over the years with my like karate. He goes, well, long before you were an MBA, you were an ABM. It's like, what the hell is an ABM? And always be marketing. Yeah, that's what you've got to remember is you screw it up in one of 2 ways. You don't have enough money, so you pay something else rather than pay for advertising, or you got too much traffic, and all of a sudden you take away from that. Let's get a sense for everybody here. Who is on track this year to be at least at $500,000 this year? Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. School growth. School growth for the year, at least $500,000, on track for at least $500,000. Okay, who's on track for 750? Who's on track for 850? We slimmed it down a little bit, okay. Who's on track for $1 million? Who's on, well, let's do this. Tim, what do you think you'll do this year?
If it projects out with what we have been doing, should be about $1,050,000, just over that.
That's triple in 3 years.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that right? Was I accurate on that? Triple in 3 years?
Last year 6, year before that 5, so not quite, maybe in 4 years.
Okay.
5 years, yes.
Okay. Double in 3 years.
Absolutely.
Okay. Triple in 4. That's not a bad growth rate. With 18 months of that outside of Chicago while your government was trying to kill you. While you had 1.5 years and 2 weeks to plan the course. By the way, one of the funniest of our meetings ever was Tim's on the phone and he's whining and bitching and complaining. Not on the phone, but on the Zoom meeting. And I don't know how many of you guys remember this. We haven't gotten to you, Rachel. He's whining, bitching, and complaining. And we're like, Tim, what are you so pissed off about? I was only up 10% this month.
It was 6.
6%, I'm sorry, okay. And this was it August or was it?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, it was like last summer sometime. And it's like, well, what did you expect to be up? He goes, oh, my projections were to be up 20%. I said, you know your government's trying to kill you right now, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are cowering at home in their basement, shaking and quaking, and you're pissed off you're only up 6%. I don't exaggerate that, do I?
No.
No. Okay, Rachel, tell us what you, let's separate the 2 schools. So the established school, what's it on track for this year?
Okay, so our goal for combined was 1.36.
Okay.
But we really just pulled out the second school last month. That's the first time we've ever done any marketing or anything
Right.
just for that school. So for Middleburg.
Is essentially, and to explain to everybody, essentially this is a startup. What it is basically a club location, part-time, that now is becoming real, right? Real space, real focus, real marketing, you're running it now, so.
We'll have a real space by the end of the year.
Yeah, right.
We don't yet. So for
Oh, you're not
Middleburg-
in yet with the new one?
No,
That's right, okay.
we're still renting a little spot.
Oh, okay, okay.
So for Middleburg, 1.25 is our goal, and I think we'll be there. For the new school, honestly, for the year, I don't even really know. We did, I would guess, I'm guessing though, if we did, I don't know. That's terrible. but-
Okay, don't worry about the new school.
Yeah, we did 25 last month, so that's good.
25,000?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's really only the second month you've been focusing on it.
That was the first month.
First month you're focused.
Yes, sir.
Wow,
Well, we had a lot
okay.
of you with that big orientation month.
Yeah. So is this kind of this, what's the rent been at the place up to now?
$600.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's this little space, $600. They've had a part-timer there who really isn't focused on doing much. And I've been saying, you know, make it a real school or kill it for as long as I can remember having the conversation.
I think you only had like 30 or 35 students there before.
Yes, we were just under 30 students. We're at 62.
Yeah, yeah.
In less than a month, really, huh?
Yeah, well, that was probably about a month and a half.
Right, right.
So what did
So you
do?
doubled.
Well, wait. And it was while everybody had COVID.
Yeah.
It was while everybody had COVID, yeah. So,
Doubled their enrollment in 6 weeks, really, and with everybody having COVID.
What did you attribute it to the most for the second school?
The new enrollments?
Yeah. Like-
Orientations. We focus on live events and orientations. We really haven't focused on doing everything marketing-wise that we're doing at Middleburg yet. That's our goal. Is next month is getting everything else in place marketing-wise.
and just for everybody's clarification, meet the teacher day or back to school day, what she means by orientation, if they don't call it that where you're at, is basically where the kids are coming back from the summer and they're coming to meeting the teacher, seeing what's going on. In most of your schools, do they have a number of other organizations there, or?
Only one or two of the bigger schools allow a lot of people in. Nobody even tries to go in. But yeah, there's like one or two schools that have Girl Scouts and robotics and a coding club and some stuff like that.
Yeah. But it's basically they're going back, they're meeting the teacher and finding out where the classroom is and seeing all that. Were these happening before school started or like slightly into the?
They happen the week before school starts. There's 2 days and all the schools in the county fall on those 2 days.
Yeah, there you
It's
go.
a fun week.
So, and
And y'all hit how many schools in those 2 days?
Cool. 17,
Wow.
18?
yeah. And if I remember correctly, you did about 500 appointments for the two schools from those orientations?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was looking at the numbers. Usually those trickle. I mean, 500 leads. We still are getting enrollments this summer from orientations the year before. But last week, I was just looking at our conversion numbers so far, and we ended up, from lead to enrollment, it ended up being about 25%.
Yeah. And by the way, we should take the moment to congratulate Rachel on her and Greg's marriage. Rachel, I'd love to work the opposite, but it's one of my favorite human beings. So, when did you guys get married? About?
Actually, it was officially March.
March. So they got married in March, and then you just had a birthday last week. So we'll congratulate you on both of those. And it's a sad time and tumultuous with your dad. Can you tell everybody about the celebration of life, what's going on?
Yes, I think someone's trying to. You're welcome. Actually, I was gonna ask to say something about that too. I really did want to take a second to thank so many of you guys in this room who sent us flowers or planted trees or things like that in the name of my dad. You know, obviously it is a tough time. My parents met when my mom was like 16, so she's never been without him. So it's tough, but it's incredible to see. I know you guys all have it in your schools. We have it in our schools, such a strong family and community. And I wanted to thank you guys for His service is September 26th, next Sunday, I think that is. We are gonna do a virtual service as well, but all that info is posted on Facebook, so if I'm not already friends with you on Facebook, add me, and that's all on there.
And we've posted it in the group too.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. So you have all of our condolences.
Thank you.
Okay, so, fantastic. Now, let's back up a little bit. If anybody has any questions,
No,
ask them.
I just wanted to say for everybody that went to orientation as well, all 18 that we went to, all the ones that I went to, there was not another single karate studio there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Not another single one, we were the only one.
Yeah, they're all too
Bill
dumb to
Clark
do
has
this
been in
stuff.
one of
There-
the schools that we go to, I've seen him in there once or twice.
Yeah.
Well, not him, but.
Yeah, one of the schools.
And what did they do, Rachel? Did they stand behind a table and like hand out brochures, or what did they do?
I'm not gonna say anything bad, but they did have like a
Well,
Power
why don't,
Ranger-
why
They
don't
had
you
a
say?
character, so that was good.
They
They had
what?
a character there, like, I don't remember what it was, it was a Power Ranger or something, so they
Okay.
had some in the costume, so they
Yeah.
attracted people. But at the end of the day, I actually worked that one. It was a couple of years ago, it's the biggest school that we have, elementary school that we have. I went over and I talked to them and I
That's
was
been-
like, yeah, it was a great event.
that's been-
It was the first time we were in that school. They're like, yeah, it was great, we passed out 200 flyers or something like that, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so they passed out flyers, and what they did at that school, that's all they did, so they had a character there or whatever. So this is the kind of idiotic things that schools are doing, but it's not idiotic, because that's what people are teaching.
What are you supposed to do? Set
Really?
appointments, other, like,
Okay,
to set
so what they did, I mean, and we've got a whole video on what they did, and do the same thing as at a movie or event
On the
promotion.
Quick Start members, the first two
Right.
videos, there's a video of me and Jay
Right,
talking about that.
but they
Okay.
set appointments and got leads and everything, but it's just ironic for those of you guys who, you know, there's only one school and all they did was hand out flyers, and how stupid that is from what you know now, but.
Especially because they put in a lot more work than we did. I worked that event by myself, and they had 3 staff members, one was in costume the whole day. And so at the end of the day, I'm thinking, you know, what it costs to run their booth, how much work they put in, and they passed out a bunch of flyers. They might get one person to call, but we booked like 50
Right,
something appointments
right.
that day.
Yeah, it's
Spend more
been-
money and labor.
I know it's like, did everybody hear that contrast? One school who's smart runs the booth, passes out 200 flyers. They made how many appointments?
50 something.
50 something. And it was the only place that there was a martial arts school at any of these things, right? And I'll give you a similar example, which is I've been doing these movie theater. You guys have seen how effective and productive these movie theater booths can be, right? I've been doing them since Karate Kid 1. Now, I forget when Karate Kid 1 was released. Somebody in here probably knows, but it was 1984. I've been doing them since 1984. And in a very high profile, in your face, you can't miss it way. Up to and including doing it with Chuck Norris, buying ads about it, buying ads in the entertainment section back when that was a thing. Everything else, there's nobody who was paying attention, possibly running a martial arts school, that could have missed it. Hey, there he is. Come on in, Mark. And even to the point of one of my favorite memories was there's a gentleman in town who always hated my guts. His name's Stuart Locker, and I could tell you stories about Stuart all day long. Anybody know Stuart? No? Anyway, he hated my guts. And the weekend I learned the lesson of it didn't have to be a martial arts movie was when Karate Kid 4 came out. Everybody remember Karate Kid 4 with Larry Swain? About 4 people in the country saw Karate Kid. And I had 13 booths going, and it was the time that I hired a really expensive ad agency, and we did really elaborate, expensive stuff rather than my normal stuff, which none of the elaborate, expensive stuff worked as well as my stuff. But we had 13 booths set up, and I start showing up at the theaters and realize I walk in and look around, and there's like nobody in there. The only person would be like a staff member who's taking a break, sitting in the movie. And it was our best weekend we had done to date, I think, on movie theater promotions. Well, it happened to be when the first Batman movie was released. the Michael Keaton movie. And the theaters were packed, and so it would be like, if there's a 24-plex, 20 screens would be playing Batman, and one over there on the side, little one, be playing Karate Kid 4, because nobody was going to Karate Kid 4. But in reality, we were just blowing the doors off. But my memory of Stewart was, among other things, we had these big guest passes that were being passed out with the tickets. And so in this one theater that I happened to be there, we had the booth set up outside, we had all the normal stuff, and it was a real small lobby, but a real big entry area. So we had the booth set outside by a ticket. They would hand you out the tickets, so we had posters and all the poster displays where they normally have the preview posters. We had everybody at the concessions wearing martial arts uniforms, and we had them handing out guest passes when you bought the ticket and pointed them at the booth that was on the way into the theater. And I happened to show up just as the competitor who hated my guts walked up and bought a ticket and got a pass to Mile High Karate. And I was able to witness the look of disgust on his face and watch him fold it up and throw it away in disgust and litter, to my great delight. So, every now and then there's additional benefits.